The city always felt cold, even when the sun was high. Tonight, it felt like an iron wall built just for me. We arrived at the Meridian at 7 o'clock. The lobby was all hushed marble and distant, curated silence. It smelled like expensive wood and old money. My wife Lena squeezed my hand. Our daughter Maya, barely 7, was clutching her teddy bear, mesmerized by the crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls. I looked the part of a tired man traveling cross-country. Old jeans, a quality but understated leather jacket. I didn't wear the suit unless I had to. Tonight I was just Elias, the father, ready to celebrate. Tomorrow, the biggest deal of my life would close. A 900 million merger. This hotel was meant to be the start of the victory lap. A simple family night before the world changed. I stepped up to the massive check-in counter. Behind it stood a man named Sterling. His name tag was polished. His smile was not. It was tight and professional, but his eyes were scanning. They lingered on Maya's sneakers, then on Lena's natural hairstyle. "Reservation for Vance," I said, leaning slightly onto the marble. Sterling didn't touch the keyboard right away. He cleared his throat. "Last name, sir?" "Vance. E. Vance." He typed slowly, deliberately. The click of the keys echoed in the quiet space. He paused. His tight smile slackened into something less polite, something inquisitive. "Ah, Mr. Vance, I'm having a small issue here." My stomach tightened instantly. I knew that phrase. It was the prologue to a familiar, ugly performance. "What seems to be the issue, Sterling?" I kept my voice level, calm. "For Maya." He looked around the pristine lobby, then lowered his voice, but not enough. Just enough to ensure the small cluster of men talking quietly in the VIP lounge section across the way could hear the tone, if not the words. They were impeccably dressed. They were the ones I was meeting tomorrow. The irony was already bitter. The system shows a prepayment for a presidential suite under the name E. Vance, but there seems to be a mismatch in the card security verification, Sterling explained. He didn't sound like he was helping. He sounded like a detective. "I paid the entire stay 3 weeks ago," I countered, pulling out the printed confirmation sheet. I slid it across the counter. "It's all right here. Confirmed. Non-refundable." Sterling barely glanced at the paper. He tapped the monitor. "Yes, the payment went through, but the system flagged the card issuer's location as high risk relative to the suite level. We often have issues with fraud at this level, Mr. Vance." "High risk relative to the suite level." I looked at Lena. Her face was tight with anticipation and dread. She saw the script unfolding before us just as I did. "I can assure you," I said, leaning in closer now, "that there is no fraud. That is my corporate card, the one used for every major transaction my company makes." Sterling ignored the corporate card detail. He focused only on the appearance of impropriety. "I understand, sir, but we have strict protocols, especially for the presidential suite. Perhaps we can offer you a standard room for the night. We could refund the difference tomorrow, pending a full internal review." A standard room. After flying 3,000 miles to close a monumental deal, after promising my daughter this view of the city, a view only the presidential suite provided, I was being downgraded and interrogated. "No, Sterling. I reserved the presidential suite. You have the payment. You have the confirmation. You will honor the reservation." My voice was still calm, but it had hardened. Sterling inhaled deeply, tilting his head back slightly, in the way people do when they feel they are dealing with an inconvenience that doesn't understand its place. "With all due respect, Mr. Vance, I cannot allow entry to the suite until the system clears the flag. It's corporate policy. And quite frankly, the suite must remain available for—" He stopped himself, catching the words before they escaped fully. "For whom, Sterling?" I pressed. He finally looked directly at my face, dropping all pretense of professional sympathy. For guests who we can verify are legitimate, I cannot risk the integrity of the floor. Perhaps if you could provide another form of identification, or perhaps wait in the lobby while I call the card issuer. It might take several hours, of course. The implication was clear. I looked like someone who could only afford this room by deception, and I was holding up the proceedings. My peripheral vision caught movement. The men from the VIP lounge were heading toward the elevators, clearly done with their discussion. They had to pass within 15 feet of the counter to reach the lift. They were already looking over. They saw me, my family, and the manager who was loudly denying our access. I knew them, Mr. Henderson, Miss Davies, the very faces of the holding company that owned 51% of the merger target. They didn't recognize me, of course. My identity was a closely guarded secret in this phase of the negotiation. Elias Vance, the CEO. They knew my name, but they expected a face from the quarterly reports. The photo where I wore the $5,000 Italian suit. Not this man in worn leather. Sterling, oblivious to the high-stakes audience, decided to deliver the final crushing blow. He picked up a phone on the desk and pretended to dial a security line. "I'm going to need to ask you and your family to step away from the counter, sir. If you refuse to comply with our security protocols, I will have to escort you off the premises." That was it, the final, searing humiliation. Maya, seeing the tension, started to cry softly, burying her face in Lena's side. Lena didn't look at Sterling. She looked only at me, her eyes communicating a mixture of shame, exhaustion, and fury. It wasn't just a suite. It wasn't just a reservation. It was a calculated classist denial of dignity played out in a theater of wealth, right in front of the very people who would shake my hand tomorrow and pretend to value my vision. I watched Henderson and Davies slow their walk slightly as they passed us, their expressions confirming they thought I was a nuisance, perhaps a failed booking, or worse, a person causing trouble in their sacred space. They paused just long enough to confirm the scene. The loud manager, the crying child, the refused black family standing in the way of high finance. The manager, Sterling, finished his fake call, dropping the phone with a decisive click. "Sir, are you leaving peacefully, or do I need to involve building security now?" My hands were balled into fists, deep in my pockets. The anger was volcanic, but a greater, colder stillness settled over me. I saw Lena's face, Maya's tears, and I understood the cost of this moment. The cost was far greater than the price of a night in a luxury suite. I looked at Sterling, who was basking in the petty power of his cheap polyester uniform. I looked past him, through the glass wall, at the dizzying lights of the city where, tomorrow, I was supposed to command a near billion-dollar deal. I pulled my hands from my pockets. One held the reservation. The other held my phone. "We are leaving, Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously low. "But before we go, I need you to confirm one detail for the record." He smirked, thinking he had won. "Yes, sir. What detail could possibly matter now?" "This refusal," I said, meeting his eyes, "is entirely because you, Manager Sterling, cannot verify the legitimacy of this family, this card, or this reservation based on your visual assessment right now. Is that correct?" He puffed out his chest. "It is based on policy and risk assessment. Yes." "Wonderful," I murmured. I turned my back on the counter, gently leading Lena and Maya toward the revolving doors, walking directly past the slowing figures of Henderson and Davies. As the heavy cold door spun us out into the street, I pulled my phone to my ear, already dialing. The deal. The $900 million merger. It felt suddenly small, insignificant, compared to the humiliation my daughter just endured. "Yes, get me Randall," I instructed the voice on the other end, my gaze fixed on the gleaming, hateful spire of the Meridian. Cancel the 9 a.m. meeting and start drafting the paperwork. We're pulling the entire acquisition, effective immediately. The air in the lobby was too thick. It smelled like polished marble and condescension. Mr. Sterling leaned over the counter again. He tapped his pen, impatient now that he had delivered his verdict. As I explained, he said, using the careful, measured tone of a man explaining long division to a slow child. Your reservation may exist, but the system shows a critical error. We are fully booked, unexpectedly. My wife, Maya, spoke quietly. Her voice was always calm, even when her eyes were spitting fire. Mr. Sterling, we drove 7 hours. We paid up front. This is a presidential suite reservation. We booked it 2 months ago for this specific event. Sterling offered a plastic smile. It didn't reach his eyes. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but I must protect the integrity of my establishment. We simply cannot accommodate you. He didn't offer a refund. He didn't offer to call another hotel. He didn't even pretend to try. He simply wanted us gone. I looked at my daughter, Zara, 10 years old, smart as a whip, perched on her small suitcase near the velvet rope. She wasn't crying. That would have been easier to bear. She was watching Mr. Sterling. She was studying the way he held his chin up, the way he dismissed us with a twitch of his lip. Zara was learning a lesson I never wanted her to learn. Sometimes facts, money, and planning don't matter. The only thing that matters is who decides you don't belong. I knelt down beside her. I adjusted the strap on her backpack. Give me a minute, Z. We'll fix this, I whispered. She whispered back, her voice small. Daddy, why does he hate us so much? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the naked truth, delivered without any adult filtering. He didn't hate us personally. He hated the sight of us expecting the best, expecting to be treated like the VIPs he reserved the real rooms for. I stood up slowly. I pushed the herd down into the hard, cold space reserved for business decisions. Mr. Sterling, I said. My own voice was dangerously level. We will step aside, but I need you to understand one thing very clearly. You are making a mistake that is going to cost you far more than one night's revenue. He sighed dramatically, lifting his hand to wave me away. Sir, I assure you, my job is to protect this hotel's reputation, and I am doing it efficiently. He truly thought I was some disgruntled traveler threatening a bad Yelp review. He thought he had already won. I pulled Maya and Zara back toward a decorative potted palm near the entrance, out of the direct line of sight from the counter, but still very much in the lobby. I took out my phone, not to call anyone, but just to look busy, to observe. My initial anger, the raw frustration of a father whose child was just humiliated, began to cool. It turned into something sharper, something I used often in the boardroom, calculated intent. I was Elias Thorne, CEO of Nexus Solutions. We specialized in disruption. We knew how to dismantle old systems and rebuild them smarter. That was my genius. And I realized this hotel manager was a system I needed to dismantle. This wasn't just about finding another place to sleep. This was about principle. This was about showing my daughter that when people try to make you small, you show them the true size of your influence. Suddenly, a flurry of motion erupted at the main glass entrance. The lobby doors swished open, admitting a gust of cool evening air and a group of 3 impeccably dressed people. They weren't just business formal, they were power formal. 2 men and a woman, all 3 carrying expensive minimalist leather briefcases. Mr. Sterling's entire demeanor snapped. The languid, arrogant posture instantly dissolved into frenetic, eager subservience. Ah, welcome, welcome to the Grand Capital, Sterling chirped, rushing out from behind the counter so quickly he almost tripped over his own feet. He was shaking hands, bowing slightly, his voice dripping with syrupy respect. This was the welcome we had paid for, the welcome that was denied to us. The group of three looked tired but focused. The lead woman, sharp and precise, adjusted her blazer and looked down at Sterling. Sterling, good. We're 15 minutes early. Is the penthouse conference room prepped? We can't afford delays. Mr. Thorne is due to arrive at 8 sharp for the final contract review. My blood ran cold. I recognized the lead woman instantly. Monica Reyes. She was the chief operating officer of Venture Collective, the investment firm scheduled to finalize the merger, the $900 million deal, the reason we were in the city, the reason I had booked the most expensive suite in this ridiculous hotel, to impress them with proximity. They were here to meet Mieti, Elias Thorne, the CEO they had been chasing for 6 months, the man whose company was about to become the centerpiece of their global portfolio. I looked from Monica Reyes, who was discussing the conference setup, to Mr. Sterling, who was practically sweating with importance, leading them toward the executive elevators. Then I looked at Zara. Her eyes were wide, watching the spectacle. The manager had just refused the family of the very man he was supposed to be preparing for, dismissing us as unworthy distractions. He had decided, based purely on his own bias, that we were not the kind of people who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on annual hotel stays, let alone the kind of people who controlled a $900 million valuation. He had separated the man who deserved the respect, Elias Thorne, the CEO, from the man he saw standing before him, Elias, the black father, trying to check in, and I was letting him do it. The anger returned, clean and sharp, without the raw heat of the initial frustration. This wasn't just poetic justice anymore. This was a necessary audit. I quietly pulled out my business card holder from my inner jacket pocket. I watched Mr. Sterling usher the Venture Collective group into the elevator, still bowing and scraping. He was preening, thinking how perfectly he had protected his prestigious property from our unwanted presence. He turned back toward the lobby, chest puffed out, ready to return to his desk and bask in his efficiency. He spotted me then, still standing under the palm, my hand gripping my card case. He gave me a cold, triumphant glare that clearly said, "You are still here? Get out." I didn't move. I simply raised my hand slightly and waited for him to cross the marble floor back to the counter. I decided then I wasn't going to pull rank to get a room. I was going to let the hotel keep their room, and I was going to ensure they paid the full astronomical price for the 5 minutes of humiliation they inflicted on my daughter. When Mr. Sterling reached the counter, he leaned in, ready to deliver his final dismissal. "Sir, I'm calling security if you continue to loiter." I didn't say a word. I simply stepped forward, handed him a single perfectly embossed business card, and waited for him to read the name and the title. The silence that followed stretched the entire length of the lobby. I watched the color drain from his face as his eyes tracked from the words Elias Thorne down to the single line below it, Chief Executive Officer, Nexus Solutions. The name of the man who was supposed to be walking through those doors in 45 minutes. The man who was about to finalize the biggest deal of Venture Collective's year. And the man whose family he had just stranded on the sidewalk. Sterling looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had nowhere to run. He had been caught. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't made my phone call yet. I hadn't initiated the real damage. I glanced over my shoulder, up to the top floor where the VIPs were now settling into the penthouse conference room, waiting for me to join them. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. It was time to make a decision that would not only cancel this hotel's future revenue, but possibly crash their entire corporate structure. I looked at Sterling, who was desperately trying to formulate an apology, a retraction, a bribe. "Don't worry, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice low. I've decided I won't be needing the room after all. I had another call to make, a far more important one than booking a different hotel. A call to Monica Reyes, telling her the entire $900 million merger was off. But first, I needed to make sure he truly understood the cost of his 5 minutes of arrogance. I needed him to watch it happen. I pulled out my phone, and before I dialed the first digit, I stepped slightly closer to the marble counter, forcing him to lean in to hear me. "Tell me, Mr. Sterling," I murmured, watching the panic rise in his eyes. "Do you enjoy managing this hotel? Because I think you might be looking for a new job by the morning." I didn't wait for his answer. I put the phone to my ear. This hotel was just step one. The message needed to be broadcast much wider. I was calling Monica Reyes, and I was going to tell her exactly why the deal was dead, and who exactly was responsible. End of part 2. I felt the blood rise in my throat. I looked at Mr. Sterling, the cheap plastic name tag barely holding on to his blazer. He had the nerve to look bored. "I paid for the presidential suite 4 months ago," I said, my voice low and measured, cutting through the lobby noise. "The confirmation is on my phone." The funds cleared instantly. He tapped a manicured finger on the mahogany counter. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated, but as I explained, there was an unforeseen clerical situation. We have reserved a standard room for you on the third floor. It meets the minimum requirements of your initial deposit." A standard room. After a 12-hour drive, 2 exhausted children, and the promise of a weekend retreat in the suite that cost more than my first car, it wasn't about the room anymore. It was about the expectation of inferiority. We booked the presidential suite because we needed the space. "It has 3 bedrooms," my wife Sarah finally interjected, her usual calm cracking under the manager's dismissive stare. Sterling didn't even look at her. He spoke past her, addressing only me. "Your party size is listed as 4. The standard king rooms accommodate 4. If you require more space, perhaps this establishment is not suitable for your family's needs." Suitable. That word hung heavy in the air, weighted with everything unspoken. Just then, the grand polished elevator doors opened. Out stepped the future of my company, Mr. Henderson, the chairman of Argos Global, flanked by 2 stern-faced analysts from London. They were all in tailor-made suits that whispered trillion-dollar wealth. They were here for our final merger meeting, the meeting that would officially put my firm, Onyx Innovations, on the global map, the meeting that would seal the $900 million deal. They walked toward the reception desk, expecting to be greeted, their eyes momentarily catching the scene. A black family, visibly tired and arguing with an overly starched white manager. Sterling saw them. His posture snapped into sudden attention, terrified of failing to impress his real clientele. He straightened his tie with a twitchy hand. "Just a moment, gentlemen," he chirped, his tone instantly shifting from condescending annoyance to oily civility. He spun back to me, his focus now laced with panicked urgency. He needed the problem gone, immediately, before it stained the pristine atmosphere for the investors. "Look, sir," Sterling hissed, leaning across the counter, dropping the pretense of professionalism entirely. "You are causing a scene. You need to accept the offer of the standard room and check in now, or you need to leave the premises. We have high-profile guests arriving. We cannot have disturbances in the main lobby." He practically spat the words, "disturbances," and high-profile guests, drawing a direct line between the two. I looked down at my son, Marcos, who was clutching his mother's hand. He was 7. His eyes were wide, taking it all in. The humiliation wasn't mine alone. It was his inheritance, served up on a platinum platter in a luxury lobby. My daughter, Lena, older and wiser at 10, understood the subtext immediately. She hadn't asked a single question about the room change. She knew. She had seen this look of sudden unworthiness aimed at her father before. Sarah put a hand on my arm, a silent plea to abandon the fight, a plea to preserve our peace, to swallow the poison and move on. I stood perfectly still. The VIPs were now standing 5 feet away, pretending to examine a floral arrangement, but clearly listening to every word. Henderson was uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. Sterling pressed his advantage, encouraged by the audience. He raised his voice just loud enough for the investors to hear his authority. "I am calling security right now if you do not vacate this immediate area," he warned, reaching for the phone beneath the counter. "This hotel operates on certain standards. If the room does not meet your expectations, I suggest you find an establishment that better aligns with your budget and—" He paused, searching for the right cutting word. "And your background." It was the final nail. Budget and background. I felt the temperature of my blood drop. The noise of the lobby faded. All the years of striving. The sleepless nights building Onyx innovations from a garage startup. The compromises. The political maneuvers. All of it boiled down to a single, casual dismissal of my background by a man I could purchase 10 times over. The manager's hand was now resting on the security extension button. My hands, which had been resting loosely at my sides, tightened into fists. But it wasn't anger that drove me. It was cold, surgical certainty. I finally looked past Mr. Sterling, straight at Mr. Henderson and his analysts. Henderson gave me a weak, almost apologetic nod, recognizing me instantly. He tried to offer a silent apology for the scene he was witnessing. But it was too late. The deal, the meeting, the $900 million commitment, it had all evaporated the moment Sterling denied my children a clean, dignified place to sleep. I did not need to be shown the door. I had already made my decision. I took one last look at my wife and children. They looked small, defensive, and weary. It was time to stand up, not just for a room, but for everything. I shifted my weight, took a deep breath, and prepared to speak, not to the manager, but to the investors who were about to become very, very confused. "We have a waiting list of true patrons," Gary stated, emphasizing the word true. He gave me that condescending, knowing look. He was signaling that he was done. The performance was over. My family and I were expected to gather our luggage, swallow the humiliation, and disappear quietly. "Your story is becoming inconvenient, Mr. Davies," he continued, adjusting his tie. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move aside. You are blocking the flow of genuine guests." Zoe, my daughter, buried her face into the side of my suit jacket. She was shaking. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice tiny and panicked. "Why is he being mean to us? We paid for the room." That whisper broke me faster than Gary's arrogance ever could. I knelt down quickly, blocking her view of the lobby. I tried to whisper a reassurance, but my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't lie to her with a smile right now. I looked up again, past the cheap arrogance of the manager, past the shiny marble floor, and directly into the VIP lounge. They were there. Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Chen, the Sterling Group, my prospective partners. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They were watching, their faces a complicated mixture of mild discomfort and professional curiosity. They had seen the entire spectacle. They heard Gary's loud, dismissing tone. They witnessed the deliberate public shaming of my wife and my daughter. Gary was treating the CEO of the company they needed to acquire as if he were a scam artist trying to steal a free night's stay. Sterling and Chen avoided eye contact now, suddenly interested in their champagne flutes. But the damage was done. The sight was burned into their memory and mine. The realization settled in my chest, heavy and cold. This massive deal, the one that defined the next decade of my company's growth, the one that required 3 years of relentless, gut-wrenching sacrifice, was set to finalize tomorrow morning. $900 million. A fortune. But what was that fortune worth if securing it meant tolerating the casual open violation of my family's dignity? What was the point of professional success if the world still treated my daughter like a nuisance, unworthy of a prepaid reservation? The truth hit me with the force of an avalanche. I had built my empire precisely so moments like this would never break us. The transaction had already shifted. It was no longer about the hotel room. It was about the cost of that denial. I stood up slowly, purposefully. Maria reached for my arm again, her nails digging slightly into my bicep. She was silently pleading for me to retreat, to save the deal, to save the peace. "David, please," she murmured. "We can just go. It doesn't matter." But it did matter. It mattered more than anything. I ignored Maria for a moment, focusing every fiber of my being on the pale, satisfied eyes of Manager Gary. I needed him to understand, not by yelling, but by the sheer, terrifying stillness of my demeanor. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit. I didn't pull out a company badge or a contract. I pulled out my thin titanium corporate card, the one reserved for corporate accounts, the one that meant unlimited access to the world's elite financial systems. I placed it deliberately on the counter, sliding it across the cold marble until it rested next to Gary's left hand. "Manager Gary," I said, my voice dangerously low, almost a whisper, "you have just made a very, very expensive decision this afternoon." He laughed, a quick, nervous puff of air. "Are you threatening the Meridian now, Mr. Davies?" he scoffed, puffing up his chest. "We will happily involve security." I shook my head once, a slow, negative motion that dismissed his entire threat. "No threats, Gary, just accounting." I let the silence hang there, thick and suffocating, before snatching the card back. I had decided. The $900 million deal was dead. It was already cancelled in my mind. The money didn't matter anymore. Only justice, delivered cold and immediate, mattered. I didn't need the room. I needed this man to lose everything. And I needed the Sterling Group to know exactly why I walked away. I turned my back on Gary's confused glare. I wrapped my arm around Zoe and met Maria's tear-filled gaze. "We are leaving, Maria," I stated. "This establishment is no longer worthy of our presence." I started walking toward the massive mahogany doors, but I paused just as I reached the archway. I glanced back, meeting the astonished eyes of Mr. Sterling across the lobby. He was slowly rising from his chair, a flicker of understanding dawning in his expression. He knew what he had just witnessed, and he knew what I was about to do. I didn't nod to him. I just gave him a look, a promise that the events of the last 15 minutes would have consequences he never imagined. We stepped outside into the afternoon sun, the heavy glass doors closing behind us, muffling the polite, deceptive quiet of the Meridian lobby. The decision was made. Now, I just needed the right place to drop the bomb. The air in the lobby didn't just thicken. It solidified into something cold and terrifying. Mr. Harrison, still flushed with the small victory of his bigotry, was staring wildly at the three imposing older men who had just emerged from the elevator. These were not random guests looking for a concierge. These were the Rothschild Group. Elias didn't move an inch. He kept his hand firmly on Maya's shoulder, a silent promise of protection. The manager, ever the pathetic sycophant, started to sputter, his composure cracking like thin ice. "Mr. Rothschild, gentlemen, we were just handling a misunderstanding here. A minor administrative issue with these people." Elias cut him off, not with a shout, with a command delivered across the silent, sprawling marble floor. "Stand down, Harrison." Harrison blinked, his eyes darting between the comfortable, unassuming suit Elias wore and the bespoke, tailored, expensive silence of the investors. Sir, I apologize, but you are creating a disturbance. You need to vacate the premises now. I will call security if you resist the policy. This small, arrogant man still hadn't processed the reality unfolding around him. He still believed he held the power. Elias finally turned, fully committing his attention to the investors. He focused on Mr. Rothschild, the family patriarch, whose face was a mask of irritation and rising panic. Gentlemen, Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the cold, sharp tone they knew well from countless negotiations. I apologize profoundly for this delay in our highly anticipated final meeting. Rothschild stepped forward, adjusting his tie, confusion clouding his features. Thorn? Elias, what is going on? I thought we were meeting in the presidential suite in 5 minutes. The look on Harrison's face when he heard the name Thorn was the most satisfying silence I had ever experienced. The color drained instantly. He knew the name. Everyone in finance knew Thorn Industries. He knew the $900 million investment, the merger. Harrison's throat worked, but no sound escaped. Elias ignored him completely now. The manager was irrelevant, a footnote to a much larger decision. Mr. Rothschild, Mr. Davies, Mr. Chen, we are not meeting in the presidential suite. I paused, letting the reality settle. We are not meeting anywhere today, or tomorrow, or ever again on this particular venture. The entire lobby went silent. The faint music stopped being faint. Rothschild looked genuinely appalled. Are you serious, Elias? We flew 13 hours for this final sign-off. Is this some kind of last-minute negotiating tactic? Elias simply gestured vaguely toward the trembling manager, who was now gripping the edge of the mahogany desk for support. The terms have shifted, Mr. Rothschild, not the financial ones, though I'm sure my legal team will address the breach of covenant clauses shortly. I stared them down, one by one. The ethical terms have shifted. I stepped back toward our scattered luggage, toward Maya, wrapping my arm firmly around Leon's small shoulder. See this place, this beautiful marble-clad establishment that your hospitality group partially owns, manages, and profits from. I let the question hang heavy in the vacuum of their sudden fear. My family attempted to check into the room we paid for 3 months ago, a room reserved under my legal name, the full reservation confirmed. I pulled the thin, crumpled printout from my inner jacket pocket. I didn't hold it out for them. I held it for me. This man, I pointed at Harrison, chose to deny us access. He deemed us a bad fit. He suggested our presence here would damage the established clientele experience. He accused us implicitly of being poor or fraudulent. I let the manager suffer the accusation. But we both know the truth, don't we, Harrison? He saw us, and he decided we didn't belong. Harrison finally found his voice, high-pitched and ragged. Sir, Mr. Thorne, I just followed protocol. The dress code, the perceived intent. Silence, I commanded, and the word cut through the air, forcing him back a step. You see, gentlemen, I continued, addressing the powerful investors. I've spent the last 6 years building Thorne Industries into a beacon of equity and true meritocracy. We built our success on the principle that the person in the threadbare coat deserves the same respect and opportunity as the person in the bespoke suit. I locked eyes with Rothschild. The elderly financier was starting to realize the astronomical cost of one prejudiced door attendant. We were about to invest $900 million into your portfolio. We were about to tie the future of my legacy to your global financial empire. I let out a sigh, a sound of profound disappointment. It was more powerful than any roar of anger could have been. And yet, I arrive at the point of finalizing this partnership, and your operation, managed by your corporate standards and reflective of your values, actively humiliates my wife and children based on the very appearance they present at this moment. I indicated Maya and the kids, who were standing straighter now, absorbing the weight of my defense. What does that tell me about the future we would share? What does that tell me about the integrity of your executive decisions when the very ground floor of your operation treats customers, even potential partners, with such overt, contemptuous disregard? Elias, wait, Rothschild pleaded, taking a desperate step forward. This is one low-level employee. We can fix this immediately. We can fire him. We can comp your entire stay. We can offer you. I raised a hand, stopping the torrent of meaningless reparations. You misunderstand, Mr. Rothschild. This is not about the compensation. It's about the culture. You don't fire the cancer. You excise the entire diseased organ. I looked at the manager one last time. You are not just fired, Mr. Harrison. You are blacklisted from this entire hospitality group network. Effective immediately. Enjoy the last few minutes you have standing on this marble floor. I turned back to the investors, sealing the verdict. The deal is cancelled. Effective immediately. Consider the terms rejected, the covenant broken, and the negotiations closed. I watched as the three titans of finance crumpled inwardly. Their $900 million deal, based on months of labor and stacks of legal documents, dissolved because of a single man's small, ugly prejudice. They thought I was bluffing. They thought the money was too big, the numbers too high, the timing too critical to walk away over a single hotel room. They were wrong. For me, it was never about the room. It was about the principal, paid for with the humiliation of my family. I walked toward the main entrance, leaving the three scrambling executives behind me. The silence was finally broken by Rothschild shouting frantic orders into his phone. But before we reached the sliding glass doors, Leon suddenly pulled hard on my sleeve and pointed back toward the manager's desk. Something was happening that even I hadn't anticipated. Something quiet but undeniably desperate. The silence that followed my words was not quiet. It was explosive. The Lexington Group investors, Sterling, Chen, Dubois, they weren't just stunned. They were paralyzed. Sterling, the leader of the deal team, looked like he had just been hit by a physical object. His complexion shifted from controlled professionalism to a mottled, unhealthy red. "Elias," he stammered, calling me by my first name now, desperation coating the sound. This is insane. A misunderstanding over a booking? This is about $900 million. I looked down at the tile floor, completely indifferent to his panic. It is exactly about $900 million, Mr. Sterling. And it is about a $500 room. The principle is non-negotiable. Lena squeezed my hand, her grip firm, a silent reassurance that I had chosen correctly. Mr. Vance, the manager, finally understood the scale of his error. He hadn't just angered a customer. He hadn't just caused a mild inconvenience. He had torpedoed a major corporate merger. I watched the realization spread across his face, the collapse of his entire world, visible in the twitch of his expensive jaw. Sterling didn't look at me anymore. His fury finally focused on the source of his catastrophe. He turned on Vance, his voice dropping to a dangerous low hiss that carried through the stunned lobby. "You fool!" Sterling snarled. "You absolute contemptible fool! Do you know who Elias Thorne is? Do you know what you just cost us? Your career is over!" Vance attempted a final pathetic defense, his hands shaking as he gestured wildly. "Sir, I just assumed. They arrived late, without luggage. They didn't look like they belonged here." That pathetic casual use of the word belong sealed his fate more completely than any legal document could. I stepped away from Lena and Mia, my height giving me an advantage over the sputtering manager. I addressed Sterling, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. given the financial carnage I had just inflicted. I believe your group, the Lexington Group, owns this Hawthorne chain entirely, correct? Sterling nodded rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. Yes, Elias, we do. Please, let us fix this immediately. We will fire him. We will offer you the deal at a discounted rate, whatever it takes. You can't fix what is fundamentally broken with discounts, Mr. Sterling, and you cannot buy back dignity, I continued, ignoring the furious whispers of the other investors. However, I require one assurance. I want documented confirmation right now that Mr. Vance will never again hold a management position in hospitality within your entire portfolio. Not here, not anywhere. I want him stripped of his certifications and tenure. Sterling didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, already barking commands at the legal entourage that was trying to fade into the potted palms near the check-in desk. The speed of their compliance was sickening. They didn't care about the injustice Vance perpetuated. They cared only about the lost profits. Vance was escorted away, his expensive suit now looking ridiculous, his posture defeated. He tried to lock eyes with me once, perhaps pleading for mercy or even a fraction of pity. I gave him nothing. Only the cold, impassive finality of justice served on his professional life. I didn't wait for the lawyers to finish drafting the termination agreement or for the investors to finish their desperate pleas. My business here was done. I took Lena and Mia's hands. Let's go home, my love, I whispered to Lena. We walked out of that gleaming marble tomb of exclusivity and arrogance. Mia, holding my hand tightly, didn't look back at the chaos. She just looked up at me, silent and trusting. We drove away from the tower, the headlights slicing through the expensive fog of downtown. I knew we had won something immeasurable that night. We kept our dignity intact. But the wind felt heavy. We had sacrificed years of strategic planning, countless hours of due diligence, and nearly $1 billion in valuation. That was the exact calculated price of being black and demanding respect in that space. The next day, the news hit the financial wire. Thorne Industries had abruptly pulled out of the planned acquisition of Lexington's hotel division. The market was in shock. Sterling called 3 times. Ms. Chen sent a frantic email blaming it all on a rogue employee and demanding a rescheduled meeting. I archived every message. But my thoughts weren't solely focused on the cancelled deal. The incident had exposed a rot far deeper than one arrogant manager. Vance was a symptom, yes, but the environment that allowed him to operate so freely, so carelessly, that came from the top. I still had 3 years' worth of sensitive financial and operational data from the due diligence process. Data about the Lexington Group's internal hiring patterns, their property maintenance budgets in certain zip codes, and their insurance claims procedures. The $900 million cancellation was the final punctuation mark on one chapter. Exposing the systemic rot, using the knowledge they had entrusted to me, would be the start of the next. I sat down at my desk, not to review quarterly earnings, but to review the internal conduct reports of the Lexington Group. Justice needed to be comprehensive. It needed to be total. And I knew exactly where to start digging. The glass partition hissed shut, sealing us inside the luxury town car. The car pulled away from the curb. The silence that rushed in was thick, heavier than the roar of the hotel lobby had been. Chloe settled instantly, leaning into her mother's side. She was exhausted, shielded. Maya looked out the window for a long moment, watching the city lights blur. $900 million. That number hung between us, silent and enormous. I had just thrown it away, not carelessly, but decisively, like cutting a necessary infection out of the body. I knew the media narrative that would follow. The volatile CEO, the emotional reaction, the sabotage over a minor inconvenience. But it was not minor. It was foundational. Maya turned to me then, her gaze deep and unwavering. "Marcus," she said softly. It was an affirmation, not a question. "I am sure, Maya," I replied. "I am entirely sure." She didn't need to ask if I regretted the decision. She knew. The integrity of our family, the respect for our daughter, was not negotiable currency. It had no price tag. They had been given a chance to see us as equals, as clients, as the foundation of their future growth. They chose instead to see a category, a problem, a disruption to their established hierarchy. And the moment Mr. Sterling smiled that smug, knowing smile, assuming my leverage was negligible, the game was over for them. I picked up my phone. The emotional spectacle was complete. Now came the operational reality. I needed to finalize the kill shot. I called Denise, my general counsel. It was late, but she answered on the first ring. "Terminate the Stonegate merger discussions immediately," I ordered. My voice was low, leaving no room for argument. No review period. No options for repair. Effective immediately. The silence on Denise's end stretched taut. She had spent 18 months of her life navigating these regulatory waters. "Marcus, are you certain? The board consensus?" "The board did not witness what I witnessed, Denise. The projections didn't account for institutionalized disrespect being paraded in front of our daughter." I gave her the concise version, the reservation, the refusal, the investors' apathy until their money was threatened. Denise was silent for another long beat. Then the steel returned to her voice. "Understood. I will draft the official notice of termination based on irreconcilable ethical standards and cultural misalignment. Stonegate's conduct today proves they cannot be trusted with a joint venture." I heard the clicking of her keyboard in the background. The machine was moving. The decision was now officially irreversible. The gates were slamming shut. The car stopped blocks away at a discreet, quiet hotel, a place where professionalism meant respect for privacy, not prejudice. As we waited for the bellman, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Sterling's lead vice president. It was a desperate, panicked plea. "Marcus, please, we can fix this. The manager is already being terminated. We will personally fly your family to our property in Paris tonight. We will buy you the entire floor. Just talk to us." Too late for buying. Too late for talking. They understood the language of loss instantly. I replied with 3 simple words. I didn't use his name. The check bounced. We settled into a suite that was quiet, functional, and devoid of the false opulence of the hotel we had left behind. Chloe was already tucked in, watching a cartoon, finally relaxed. Maya stood beside me, looking out at the city spread below us. "The fallout is going to be immense," she stated, knowing the reality of the business world. "A spectacular, necessary implosion," I confirmed. "They will accuse me of vengeance. They will try to mitigate the damage by leaking false narratives." "But the narrative you deliver will be the truth," she countered. "The truth and the cost," I agreed. "I need to make sure the price they paid wasn't just the $900 million deal, but their reputation." My phone was vibrating constantly now. My own team was confirming the chaos on Stonegate's side. The rumors had hit the market within minutes of us leaving the curb. Stonegate stock was hemorrhaging value in the after-hours trading session. The initial projections had shifted from merger euphoria to sudden catastrophic instability. Sterling had not just lost a merger partner, he had lost credibility, trust, and billions in projected valuation because he allowed a low-level manager to decide that our family wasn't worth the trouble. Mr. Jenkins, the manager, was merely the instrument. He was the visible tip of the iceberg of corporate arrogance and assumed supremacy. He thought his paycheck protected his prejudice. He would learn that the price of his bias was far steeper than his entire annual salary, or even the hotel itself. He had, with his few arrogant words, caused a multi-billion-dollar tremor. But the financial damage was only phase one. Phase two required clarity. It required documentation. It required ensuring that the official reason for the termination was loudly and clearly tied to racial discrimination and failure of ethical standard. The world needed to know precisely why a deal of this magnitude was cancelled. I messaged my counsel again. Denise, start drafting the public statement. Every line must confirm that Stonegate's culture demonstrated an unacceptable hostility toward my family's dignity. Do not use ambiguity. Be direct. Tomorrow, the reckoning would go public. The quiet humiliation of a family would be met with the loudest possible economic devastation. I looked at Maya, ready for the storm ahead. We had won the battle for dignity, but the war for public perception was just beginning. David turned his back on the horrified Mr. Van der Zee. He did not need to see the spreadsheet stare. He did not need to witness the $900 million contract disintegrate into dust right there on the polished marble floor. He had already seen the only number that mattered, the look of quiet fear on his son's face. That was the calculation that decided the merger. He walked past Mr. Sterling, who was still muttering incoherent pleas, sweat pasting his thin hair to his forehead. Sterling started following him, calling out, "Mr. Peterson, wait, we can fix this. I can upgrade you to the royal suite. Anything. We'll comp your entire stay for the month." David stopped at the revolving door, but he didn't look back at the manager. He spoke directly to the silent, trembling investors clustered near the check-in desk. "Gentlemen, you have seen how easy it is for systemic prejudice to operate inside your institution," David said, his voice measured and dangerously calm. "You chose to invest in a business culture that rewards arrogance and permits the degradation of people like my family." He let the implication hang in the air. When integrity is optional, the deal is impossible. You do not partner with organizations whose foundations are built on dismissing human value. He saw Van der Zee desperately pull out his phone, already dialing the head of the entire hospitality chain. The cleanup had begun, but the damage was terminal. David didn't wait to hear Sterling's imminent termination confirmed. That was a foregone administrative conclusion. The true consequence was already settled in the loss of the largest merger deal that corporation had ever pursued. Lila placed her hand firmly on the small of his back. Her touch was the anchor he needed. She didn't look triumphant or victorious, just deeply, quietly relieved. The silent battle they fought every day, the struggle to simply exist with dignity, had finally been won, publicly and irreversibly. We stepped outside, the cool evening air, a shocking contrast to the boiling chaos we left inside. Michael Jr. walked between us, not talking, but his shoulders were straight now. The weight of the humiliation had lifted the instant his father revealed his true self and chose his family over the fortune. We stood on the curb, waiting for the replacement driver we had called hours ago, before all this began. I looked at David. "You didn't hesitate," I whispered. He finally smiled, a tired, genuine smile that had been hidden by the veneer of the corporate persona for too long. "They sold their integrity for a few nights in a premium room, Lila," David said softly. "I sold a few commas on a balance sheet to teach my son what real power looks like." He adjusted the cuff of his impeccable suit, the suit that had hidden his true identity until the precise moment he chose to reveal it. You never teach a lesson by accepting the insult. The black sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the shimmering neon lights of the city that now seemed to belong to us. As we climbed inside, I saw Mr. Sterling emerge from the hotel entrance. He looked broken, not just fired, but fundamentally broken by the realization that his casual disdain had cost his company hundreds of millions of dollars. He saw us entering the luxury sedan, saw David nod once to the driver. The final realization of the magnitude of his mistake hit him, and he sank onto the edge of a nearby planter, holding his head in his hands. It wasn't malice David sought, but accountability. Justice was often tedious, slow, and expensive, but sometimes, when the stars aligned just right, justice was immediate, overwhelming, and infinitely satisfying. We drove away from the dazzling, deceptive facade of the Sterling Hotel. David reached over and touched Michael Jr.'s chin, tilting the boy's gaze up to meet his own. "Son," he said, "never let them diminish your space. Never let them shrink your worth." Michael Jr. simply nodded, eyes wide with understanding. He had witnessed the ultimate power move, the decision to walk away from everything when respect was denied. But as the sedan merged onto the interstate, David leaned back, the victory settling in his bones, heavy and exhilarating. He had won the battle, secured the dignity of his family, and delivered definitive public justice. But the real question remained, the one David didn't voice aloud to us, but the one I saw swimming in his eyes. What happens now? The corporate world was a vast, unforgiving landscape. Canceling the Sterling deal was a statement heard globally. The backlash would come. And David Peterson was now officially a man who had chosen moral principle over the finalization of a $900 million merger. We had our dignity, but we were about to find out exactly how much that priceless commodity truly cost in the ruthless world of high finance.